Hey, this is Jeff Ratcliffe here. Let's talk about the value in daily fantasy for a minute. The big prizes, yeah, they're attractive, but you have to finish in the top 2% out of thousands of experts to win any real money. So even on your best day, you still feel like you're losing. Now you can play something better. Stat Hero. Stat Hero is a house-based game that combines the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools. Each Stat Hero contest lasts multiple days, but requires only one entry fee, so your money lasts longer. Yes, you can play multiple days with only one entry fee. Stat Hero gives you a smaller contest and more chances to win, and no more competing with sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. Survive the game and download Stat Hero today and see how the face of daily fantasy has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us. Stat Hero now open for NFL and NBA. For more information, please visit stathero.com. What is up? It's the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe, and it's Wednesday, January 8th. Divisional Round week is upon us. Almost all the coaching hires are done, and free agency is not too far away. So let's tie all that together on today's pod. Want to kick it off with that news, though, that the coaching hires are now in place in New York and Carolina, and not exactly how we expected this to unfold, but an interesting series of events for sure. So let's start things off with the Carolina Panthers, who end up hiring Matt Rule as their next head coach. Matt Rule met with David Tepper in Waco, Texas, and Tepper essentially would not let him get on the plane to go to his interview with the New York Giants. Commenting on everything, Tepper, it sounds like he sees a lot of himself in Matt Rule. The quote was, "He dresses like expletive." So we'll fill in the blank there. I'm sure it's a curse word for fecal matter. But anyway, he's sweating all over himself. He's a lot like me. So anyway, Tepper finds his guy. And this makes a lot of sense. We figured he would go in this sort of direction. Maybe not Matt Rule per se, but this direction, analytically inclined. Matt Rule obviously has this track record of turning around programs too, with what he did at Temple, what he did at Baylor. I think this is a good landing spot for him, and it's ultimately a good hire for the Carolina Panthers. It's an exciting hire after you had this Rivera regime in place for quite some time. You go in a different direction. I think that makes a lot of sense. Of course, he inherits a nice crop of skill position players, but of course, the big question for Matt Rule will be, what do we do at quarterback? Do they retain Cam Newton? If they don't, the future quarterback is obviously not on the roster. So where do you go on that front? That, of course, a big question for this team. So we shall see there. But anyway, Matt Rule in place. Matt Rule not going to the Giants. It was the widespread rumor that he would go to the New York Football Giants because he had his previous connections, having worked with the organization in the past. But they do not get him. And I guess to make some Giants fans happy, they did not end up hiring Jason Garrett. There was a little bit of a rumor mill circulating about Jason Garrett potentially going up there. They end up going with Joe Judge, which for a lot of people, I think the immediate reaction was, who? But let's be clear. It's not like Joe Judge is just kind of completely a rando hire. I mean, this is a guy who has spent a better part of the last decade with the New England Patriots. He went to the Patriots in 2012, so he's been a part of 3 Super Bowl championship winning teams. Started out as the special teams assistant, then became the special teams coordinator, and then this past season he served as the wide receivers coach. Before that, he spent 3 seasons with Alabama, and 2 of those seasons they won the national championship. So he's been a part of 3 Super Bowl winning teams and 2 national championship teams. Not a lot of folks out there can actually say that. But regardless, I think here's the key for the New York Giants, because is this the most desirable job? Probably not. I mean, not only do you have the spotlight of the New York media on you, but you have some rebuilding to do. Now, the nice thing is you have somebody who looks like he can be a future franchise quarterback in Daniel Jones. We don't know that for certain yet, but he certainly has. He showed signs of it. You have some good skill position players, but you have a lot of holes to fill. Beyond that, though, I had a conversation with a former NFL executive regarding why Belichick disciples haven't had a lot of success on their own. A lot of them, have failed or have struggled when you look at them leaving New England and going elsewhere. And I was told that one of the biggest problems is that they don't bring their guys with them. If we've seen some of the situations where guys struggle, it's because they didn't bring their guys with them. So it will be interesting. Who does Joe Judge tap, or who does the organization tap as offensive/defensive coordinators? Because you would have to figure it'd be highly unlikely Joe Judge would be calling plays. So who do they bring in? Do they bring in guys who he has worked with before, his quote-unquote guys, or guys from that background, the Saban Belichick background, or are there outsiders? That's going to be key here for ultimately instilling a culture, instilling what they want to do, under Judge. But anyway, we'll pay attention to that one. We'll keep you posted. Now the Browns remain the last job out there. Surprise, surprise. Sorry, Browns fans. Not a lot of jobs available this year, but that one still is out there. So, we'll keep you updated on what happens there and what that means. And then eventually, once this all the dust settles from the season in February, I'm going to take a look at all of the changes. So not just the head coach changes, but the offensive coordinator changes and what that means for fantasy. But that'll be coming later on. Anyway, the other thing that I want to get to before we get to rankings here for the divisional round is another set of rankings that actually went live today at pff.com. So you can check them out over there. But free agency is not too far away. We're looking at free agency roughly 2 months away, and there's a lot of interesting names in this year's free agency class. So I did a little exercise for the website where I ranked the top skill position guys. And let's be clear that there are some people who won't make it to the open market, but they're heading into their free agency year, right? So anyway, I ranked them out. There ended up being 30 guys. I want to run through that list really quickly here with a few thoughts. Topping the list, I ended up having Amari Cooper atop the list. I don't think he leaves Dallas, but here's the thought process here. This is not, when I look at this for fantasy purposes, this is not going to be the same list that you're going to see out there when people are literally just looking at this for NFL purposes. For fantasy purposes, I'm looking at both a short and long-term window. So 2020 and beyond. And for me, a long-term window is ultimately 3 years. Can't go any further than that really for dynasty purposes because there's just too many variables at play in the NFL. So anyway, he's 26 years old when the season begins. So he's still young. He's shown that he can be a top 10 fantasy receiver with the Cowboys. And if he sticks in Dallas, Mike McCarthy's offense or whoever, ultimately it looks like Kellen Moore could still be there, but a combination of those two guys, it's going to be pretty favorable for Cooper. So he stays at the top. I do think he ultimately stays in Dallas, but far from guaranteed. At number 2, I put Derrick Henry. Now, Derrick Henry's a little tricky because he's coming off this monster season, right? 300 plus carries, leads the league in rushing yards, fantasy monster. He's going to be 27 next season. Obviously a pivotal age. I don't know if the Titans pay him. So where does he go? Is it a situation that is as good for him as this one? And then how much does he have left? The nice thing is he hasn't been run into the ground. Like when you compare his career arc to somebody like Ezekiel Elliott in terms of usage, this is really the first year he was used heavily. He didn't have that in the past, so that helps. At number 3, I put Austin Eckler. He was the number 4 fantasy running back in PPR this year. 92 catches. He's 2 years younger than Melvin Gordon. And that's really the difference maker. Now, this is partially with the thought process that maybe he stays there with the Chargers. I don't think Melvin Gordon stays. But I think Eckler can continue to be a factor, especially with what he does in the passing game. At 4, I put Kenyon Drake. So Kenyon Drake, if you would ask me like 2.5 months ago, where would I have him? He would not have been 4. But his performance down the stretch was really impressive. 25 years old as well. So he's still on the right side of that age 27 season. And if he stays in Arizona, we know what the potential is already. Hunter Henry at 5. I do think he ultimately stays with the Chargers. It's really rare for a younger tight end with his skill set to make it to free agency, so I don't think that's going to happen. It depends on who they have at quarterback. That's a big factor there. Dak Prescott at 6. Don't expect him to leave Dallas, obviously. It's more a question of long-term deal or franchise tag. But anyway, he's going to be a top 10 guy coming off a near 5,000-yard season. Number 7 is really interesting to me. I have Kareem Hunt at 7. The suspension, all that stuff is in the rearview mirror. Teams are going to be a little bit more willing to take a chance on him now. He's very likely going to reach the open market. He's 25 years old. If he lands in a spot where he's now the lead back, we not only get the pass catching, but we get the early down work. Watch out. He could be a top 12 fantasy running back in the right landing spot. Now, you may have noticed I have him ahead of Melvin Gordon. I have Melvin Gordon at 8. So for me, Melvin Gordon, the holdout didn't work. He's going to be 27 this season. He's got some juice left. I don't think he's this next year's version of what we got out of Le'Veon Bell this year, but I don't know if he's going to be that far off, so be careful with him. At 9, I have Austin Hooper. I don't think he gets out of Atlanta, and he's going to be one of the better tight end options next year. At 10, Jameis. How crazy is this? Jameis Winston, 5,000-yard passing season. He may not be back with his team. He is the ultimate, I'm a way better fantasy option than I am a real quarterback, right? But he's going to be a fantasy factor wherever he lands. He's going to be a starter next year. At 11, I have Drew Brees. Did you realize Drew Brees from week 8 on, when he returned from the injury, was the number 3 fantasy quarterback? I just, doing the research for this piece, I saw that and I'm like, wow, I did not realize. I knew it was good. I didn't realize it was that good. But regardless, it's whether or not he stays with the Saints. That's the key here. If he goes elsewhere, you don't know. I mean, I like what he has in New Orleans right now, so we'll see what they end up doing there. Ryan Tannehill at 12. I do expect him to stay with the Titans. It's not a matter of, will they let him go? No, they're not going to let him go. It's going to be, is this a franchise tag or is this a long-term deal? I think you can consider him, he's going to be a fringe top 15 fantasy quarterback in drafts this year. 13, Robbie Anderson. As you see, the list starts to unwind a little bit at this point, but Robbie Anderson can still be a wide receiver 3 if he lands in a spot where he can be a complimentary, like a number 2 field stretcher, and it's in a pass-friendly offense. Matt Brady at 14, undersized, always hurt, but when he's on the field, he's so electric. So another guy in the right spot, he could be a factor. Now we get to an interesting point in the rankings, though, because we get to these old guys. From 15 to 18, here's what I have. AJ Green, Manny Sanders, Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers. I mean, Green, he's a marquee name, but I don't know how good he's going to be. Even if he stays with the Bengals, if he lands in a good spot, it's just, I don't know how good he's going to be. And can he stay healthy? Emmanuel Sanders, 33 years old when next season starts. I hope he stays with the 49ers, but I don't know if he will. Tom Brady, who knows where he ends up being. He's not going to retire. I think he'll be a 2 quarterback option, but not a guy in 1 quarterback. Same with Rivers. At 19, I have Eric Ebron. Hey, if Eric Ebron lands in a spot where there's no other, there's not a Jack Doyle, he could be a viable every week starting tight end or, a strong streamer. It's got to be the right landing spot, though. He's not going to be with the Colts. Taysom Hill at 20. He's the most mysterious player out of this entire class this year, but if a team believes in him to be a full-time starting quarterback, watch out for fantasy purposes. He could be something. He could certainly be something. He could also be a colossal bust. There's a lot of potential outcomes there. 21, 22, older guys as well. Carlos Hyde, Larry Fitzgerald. Hyde's coming off his first 1,000-yard season, but he's going to be 30 next year. Fitzgerald finished 35th among wide receivers this year. Hasn't officially said he's going to play or hang him up, but it sounds like he's leaning towards playing, but best fantasy days are behind him. 23, Teddy. Does sound like Teddy's going to stay in New Orleans no matter what. He just, I would rather have Taysom Hill as a quarterback option just because there's a higher fantasy ceiling. More volatility, sure, but a higher fantasy ceiling. But, so he's not that high on this list. DeAndre Washington, DeMarcus Robinson at 24, 25. Washington did a nice job filling in for Josh Jacobs, but let's be clear. He's 27 years old at the start of the season, and he has never proven he can be more than a backup. So I don't think he's going to be a factor. Demarcus Robinson, same thing. I mean, he had some upside earlier this year. He's younger. He's not as old as Washington, so he's younger for the position, but I don't think he's going to be anything more than like a DFS guy. 26, Jacob Hollister. He had good performances in week 9 and 10, but otherwise he's been a 3 for 32 tight end. 27, 28, LaShawn McCoy, Lamar Miller. And I'll throw 29 in there too, even though he's not a running back. Demaryius Thomas. 3 old guys. Load management for LaShawn McCoy, nah, he's done. 32 years old at the start of next year's season. Lamar Miller will be 29, so younger, but coming off a torn ACL, MCL. Tough. DT will be 32 years old. His best fantasy days are way behind him. He had 36 catches in 11 games this year. 1,000-yard season. Last time he did that was in 2016. I wouldn't surprise me if those 3 aren't even on rosters, if they don't even get signed. It would not surprise me. We could be sitting here in like week 6 and be like, oh yeah, they aren't on rosters. Marcus Mariota at 30. Very fitting here. He was the 2nd overall pick in 2015. Here we are 5 years later in 2020, and his team is very likely not going to retain his services. He is not likely to be a starter elsewhere. This is kind of crazy when you think of the optimism surrounding both him and Jameis at that 2015 draft. But right now, man, oh man, Marcus Mariota's fantasy stock has fallen off a cliff, both short and long term. So there you go, top 30 free agents. It's early, very, very early in the process, but it's a nice little list to get a sense of who's on there. So, when I put this list together, a couple of names did surprise me. I forgot that they were, they were heading into free agency or potentially heading into free agency. So, yeah, there's definitely a chance for some fantasy impact for sure out of that group. Anyway, I want to get over to the rankings for the divisional round, roll through these pretty quickly. And we'll kick things off at quarterback. I really think you look at a top tier this week of Jackson and Mahomes. And of course, we have Jackson at the top, but Mahomes has a really nice matchup against the Texans. So don't overlook that. That's a phenomenal matchup right there. The next group I have is this, the secondary tier of Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, and Aaron Rodgers. So when you look at it, Wilson's matchup isn't great against the Packers and in Green Bay, but he's going to have to put that team on his back because of the backfield that he's working with now. They're not going to be able to run all over the Packers. Deshaun Watson, tougher than you'd think matchup, and also has to go on the road here, but Watson has shown the ability to produce numbers even in tough matchups this season. And then Rodgers against the Seahawks, it's more a matter of, how does this game unfold? Do we see a lot of Aaron Jones in this game? And there's not a lot of weapons for Rodgers. Now, the remaining 3, the guys who I'm likely not going to use this week, Jimmy G, Tannehill, and then Cousins rounds it out at 8. Tough matchup for Tannehill and Cousins. And Jimmy G, I expect to see, a little bit of the passing game, but I didn't include him in that next tier up just because of, the lack of consistency that we've seen. He showed a high ceiling in a couple points, but the lack of consistency there. Moving over to running back. At the top, I have a tier of 3. So it's Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, and Dalvin Cook. And by the way, if you want these rankings, PFF.com. Henry has a tough matchup. There's no way around it. He has to go into Baltimore, face that Ravens defense, but he also had to go into New England and face that Patriots defense, and they fed the rock to Henry. So that's the thought process here. Just because it's a bad matchup doesn't mean we completely discount Henry. Aaron Jones in his nose for the end zone comes in as the second option. And then Dalvin Cook, still putting him in the top tier, even though it's a tough matchup. But especially his goal line work is just super appealing there with Cook. My next tier is another 3 backs. It's Damian Williams, Raheem Mostert, and Mark Ingram. And so I did include Mark Ingram here. Where we currently stand with Mark Ingram is Tuesday was a DNP. I do not have a Wednesday practice for him, but he did experience some tightness. However, the team is calling him day-to-day. If you've listened to this podcast all year long, you know that distinction, right? Week to week means he ain't playing. Day-to-day means he could play. He could legitimately play. So if Ingram plays, then I'll move him up to 4. He'll go ahead of Williams and Mostert. It's close, but he'll go right in that range. If Ingram does not play, Then we have a situation where Gus comes screaming up my rankings. Gus currently at 12. Gus comes screaming up the rankings and slots in at 6. And Gus it's not like he's uber cheap. He's not, dirt cheap this week. But if you look on FanDuel, he's 5,400. Mark Ingram 7,500. So you're saving some dough there. And on DraftKings, it's relatively close as well. 6,700 for Mark Ingram, and then 4,900 for Gus Edwards. So it's about the same range is what I mean by close. It's about the same range of a gap between those guys. Gus Edwards will be a value. Let's put it this way. He's going to be a chalk play. If Ingram does not go, we'll update that, of course, on Friday's show. After that group, the remaining players who I think you can at least look at if you're looking at DFS contests, and on Friday's show, we'll talk one and dones. 7 down to Gus Edwards at 12 is Carlos Hyde, Travis Homer, Duke Johnson, Marshawn Lynch, Tevin Coleman, Gus Edwards. So you have the secondary 49ers back who could potentially see some work in the red zone as he has this season in Tevin Coleman at the bottom of that list. You have Carlos Hyde in what should be a good matchup, but a poor game script. Duke Johnson, maybe a little bit more favorable game script, but he doesn't see a lot of touches. And the 2 Seattle guys as well, and neither one were efficient last week. This is a much better matchup, and I do think Homer sees more touches, but he doesn't see the crucial red zone touches that Lynch sees. So it's a little bit of a mess once you get beyond those first 6 running backs this week. Over to wide receiver, again, a top tier of 3 guys. Adams, Hill, Hopkins, like that top group. Adams going to see a ton of targets because he's the only show in town, pretty much. Tyreek has a beautiful matchup, and Hopkins doesn't have as good of a matchup, but they're going to feed Hopkins the rock. Moving on to our next tier, and here's the way I block it off. Lockett, Diggs, Metcalf, Brown, and Thielen. We'll throw Thielen in there too. He comes in at 8. So Tyler Lockett at 4. I have him ahead of DK Metcalf, and beware of recency bias. A lot of folks are going to play DK over Lockett. I think this is a Lockett week, not a DK week. Last week was an obvious DK week because the Eagles struggle against speed and size and, DK Metcalf. Lockett has speed as well, and I think when you look to the matchup here, the tougher matchups are going to be on the outside. The better matchups out of the slot, that's where Lockett is. Now, in terms of Diggs and Thielen, I'm not going to 100% go overboard with Thielen from last week either. I still think Diggs is the better play, but that is a tough matchup for both of those guys. And speaking of tough matchup, A.J. Brown. However, here's the thing. They do not shadow. The Ravens do not shadow. So when you look at who's going to line up against Marcus Peters most frequently, it's actually not A.J. Brown. It'll be Corey Davis. And then when you look at who lines up against Marlon Humphrey most frequently, it's going to be Tajay Sharp or Adam Humphries if he can get back on the field. I don't expect that to happen. So that means it's not a great matchup against Jimmy Smith, but it's the best. Best is a bad word, but it's the best of those 3 matchups. It's the least bad. Is that a thing? We'll go with that. 9 and 10, we have a sort of mini tier of the 49ers receivers. And then Marquise Brown comes in at 11. Sanders and Samuel, I love the matchup, but I think you're going to have to get this one right because I don't think they're both going to go off. And I know I'm hedging with my rankings, but it's been a little bit tricky to navigate those waters with these two. And then Marquise Brown at 11. Here's the problem with Brown. Upside galore, yes, but the team doesn't throw the wide receiver a lot, so you're really hoping he's got to nail a big play or two, and that isn't exactly the way you want to go about things for fantasy purposes. The remaining group of players like punt guys, Sammy Watkins, Kenny Stills, Corey Davis, Alan Lazard, David Moore, Tajay Sharp, Kendrick Bourne. That rounds it out for me there. They're all guys you could possibly punt with. I do like punting with Sammy Watkins this week, by the way, for upside bang for your buck there. Tight end. Well, top 2, Kelsey Kittle. Obvious, don't even need to explain that. Tougher matchup for Kittle, by the way. I have a micro tier of Mark Andrews in between those guys. Andrews, he doesn't have as high of a floor as those guys, but he may have just as high, if not higher, a ceiling because of his red zone usage. After that, the only other tight ends worth using this week, Hollister, Smith, Graham, Rudolph, Fells. I don't know how, you basically have to score a touchdown with these guys, so I don't know how blown away I am. I'm going to build a lot of lineups around Mark Andrews this week, to be honest with you. And probably I'll have a little bit of exposure to some of these deeper guys, but really it's an Andrews build week. All right, so that does it for the rankings. Like I said, the rankings are at PFF. We did do an article write-up on these rankings. We also did an article write-up on those free agents if you want to refer back to that list. It's a nice list to have. Anyway, we'll be back on Friday for our third and final pod of the week. On Friday's show, you know what we do. We're going to break it all down for you. We'll talk some one and done, matchup upgrades, downgrades for all 4 games, DFS, all of that fun stuff. That'll be on Friday's pod. Until then, at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter and Instagram. For PFF, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.